She called her stepdad her real dad at parent-teacher night. So I walked away, stopped paying for everything, and made her realize what being a father truly means. I'm Oliver, 42M, and if you had told me a year ago that a single parent-teacher night would completely change my relationship with my daughter, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's exactly what happened. My daughter Emma is 13, and for the past 3 years since my divorce, I've been doing everything in my power to make sure she has stability. I covered school fees, paid for orthodontics, signed her up for summer camps, bought every piece of sports gear she needed, and never once complained. Her mother moved on quickly, marrying a finance guy who talks more about crypto than reality, and while he played the role of husband, I quietly played the role of provider. Our custody arrangement gave me every other weekend and Wednesday dinners, which wasn't much, but I cherished every minute. I never missed parent-teacher nights. I always sat in those plastic chairs, smiling at reports about Emma's reading levels, asking about her math progress, and secretly dreaming about her future in college. I thought that even though the divorce had been hard, Emma knew who her real dad was. But on that Tuesday evening, everything I believed was shattered. Emma walked into the classroom with her mother and stepdad, smiling like she was walking a red carpet. When her teacher asked for introductions, Emma stood tall, pointed to her stepdad, and said, "This is my real dad." Then she pointed to me, expression flat, and said, "That's just my mom's ex." I cannot fully describe the feeling. It was like every late-night homework session, every emergency room visit, every soccer game where I cheered the loudest had vanished in a second. I felt my face heat up, then go cold. Her teacher looked confused. My ex looked shocked, but no one corrected Emma. Not even her stepdad, who just sat there, silent. I shook the teacher's hand, thanked her for her time, and walked out. I didn't argue. I didn't demand recognition. I just left with my dignity intact and my heart completely broken. On the drive home, I had 2 hours to think. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew I couldn't keep living like this, paying for everything while being reduced to mom's ex. I sat at my kitchen table that night, coffee going cold beside me, as I looked through 3 years of records. 18,000 a year in tuition, 6,500 for orthodontics, over 3,000 for summer camps, not to mention sports fees, medical costs, clothing, and countless extras. All that money, all that effort, and I had been written out of my own daughter's life with a single sentence. So the next morning, I made calls that I never thought I'd make. The orthodontist, payments would no longer come from me. The summer camp, canceled. The private school, they'd need to contact my ex directly. And as I hung up each call, I felt something strange, a mix of sadness and relief. If I wasn't her real dad, then it was time for the one she chose to start acting like one. The first wave of consequences arrived faster than I expected. By Thursday afternoon, my ex-wife had left 6 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. At first, she sounded confused, asking why the orthodontist had called about overdue payments. Then she grew angry, accusing me of sabotaging Emma's life. Finally, by the 6th message, her tone was shaken and pleading, begging me to call back because Emma's camp had canceled her spot and the school was asking for immediate payment. I listened to them all in silence, sitting alone in my apartment, realizing that for the first time since our divorce, I was no longer the safety net. When Friday morning came, the school's finance office called me directly. They informed me that without my supplemental contributions, Emma's tuition was in danger of falling behind. I politely explained that my legal obligations would still be met, but any extra payments beyond the court order would need to be handled by her mother and stepfather. The woman on the phone sounded surprised. She had always known me as the responsible parent who paid everything on time without complaint. But I stood firm. My role had changed because Emma herself had changed it. The weekend that followed was the hardest yet. I turned off my phone, packed a small bag, and spent 2 days hiking in a nearby state park. Surrounded by nature, I tried to untangle the knot in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Emma's voice saying, "This is my real dad." I wanted to believe she didn't mean it, that she was just trying to impress someone, or acting out like teenagers do. But deep down, I knew the words had been chosen on purpose. A 13-year-old knows what real dad means, and she had chosen to use it to cut me out. When I finally turned my phone back on Sunday night, I found 17 missed calls. 3 of those were from Emma herself. The first voicemail was full of anger. She demanded to know why her braces appointment had been canceled. The second was confused, asking if this was all because of parent-teacher night. The third one was softer, filled with tears, asking me to call her back, saying she was sorry, and begging me to fix everything. I saved all 3 messages not to punish her, but to remind myself that words have power, and choices have consequences. Emma was finally beginning to learn that. Monday morning brought a long text from my ex-wife. She admitted that her husband's income was already stretched thin because he was paying child support from his previous marriage. Without my extra contributions, they simply couldn't afford Emma's lifestyle. She asked me to meet her for coffee so we could work something out. I waited until Tuesday evening to reply, sending back a short message saying I was available if she truly wanted to talk. Within minutes, she suggested Wednesday afternoon at a local cafe. That meeting was exactly what I expected. My ex arrived looking exhausted, makeup smudged, hands shaking around her coffee cup. She started crying before she even sat down. She told me Emma had been devastated all weekend, asking over and over why her real dad was being so cruel. The irony of those words nearly made me laugh, but I stayed quiet. My ex finally admitted that they had relied on my financial support far more than they realized. Without me covering tuition, braces, and camp, everything was falling apart. She begged me to reconsider. She promised that Emma would apologize, that she would make sure Emma understood what I meant to her, that they would even allow me more custody time if it meant I'd keep paying. I let her speak until she ran out of words. Then I looked her in the eye and asked a simple question. If Emma's stepdad is her real dad, why isn't he paying for all of this? The question hung between us like smoke. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, but no answer came. Finally, she muttered something about blended families being complicated. I shook my head. To me, it wasn't complicated at all. Emma had made her choice publicly. She wanted her stepdad to be her real dad. Well, real dads pay for braces. Real dads pay for tuition. Real dads handle the bills. I told my ex I was willing to resume support, but only if Emma faced the truth of what she had done. She needed to acknowledge her mistake, apologize not just to me but also to her teacher for lying, and publicly reaffirm who her father really was. Without that, I would continue to step back and let her real dad take responsibility. My ex cried harder, saying Emma was only 13 and didn't understand what she was saying. But I held my ground, because 13 is old enough to know that words have meaning. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Emma was standing there, tears streaming down her face, looking so much smaller than her age. Her stepdad's car was idling in the parking lot. She asked if she could come inside. And even though I wanted to stay cold, I couldn't say no. She sat on my couch and sobbed, telling me she was sorry. She admitted that she had been angry with me for missing a soccer game. She said her friends at school called their stepfathers dad, and she wanted to fit in. She said the words came out before she thought about what they really meant, and then she was too embarrassed to take them back. Hearing her speak like that tore me apart. This was still my little girl, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest, the one who once called me daddy every night before bed. She had made a terrible mistake, yes, but she was also a child, trying to find her place in a complicated world. I held her hand and told her that I forgave her, but forgiveness wasn't enough. Trust had to be rebuilt, and that started with owning her actions. She agreed to apologize to her teacher. She promised never to diminish me like that again, and she said she wanted me to always be her dad, no matter what. When I drove her back to her mother's house that evening, something felt different. For the first time in a long time, Emma held my hand as we drove, just like she used to when she was younger. Her stepdad was waiting in the driveway, and for the first time, he actually walked over to thank me. He admitted he hadn't known how to handle the situation that night at school. He said honestly that he couldn't afford to provide for Emma the way I had been, and that he respected the role I played. That moment marked a shift. For the first time, boundaries were becoming clear. When the dust finally settled, I sat alone one evening and thought about everything that had happened. I didn't feel joy in watching my daughter struggle, nor did I feel satisfaction in seeing my ex and her husband scramble to pick up the responsibilities I had quietly carried for years. What I felt instead was a deep sense of relief. For too long, I had allowed myself to be used, to be seen only as a wallet instead of a father. That night at parent-teacher conference had been cruel, but it had also been the wake-up call I needed. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Emma began to see the reality. She missed dance class because there wasn't money for lessons. She had to switch to public school because the private one couldn't be paid for anymore. Dentist appointments were skipped until her stepdad could figure out insurance. The life she had taken for granted began to change in front of her eyes. And though it hurt me to watch from a distance, I knew it was a lesson she needed. One day, out of nowhere, Emma reached out. Her voice trembled as she said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said that night. I know now who's always been there for me." The words didn't erase the pain, but they did reach a place in my heart that I thought had closed forever. I told her calmly that being a father was never about recognition. It was about presence. But that presence should never be taken for granted. I didn't run back and start paying for everything again. Instead, I offered her something more valuable. My time, my guidance, and my love. She needed to understand that respect goes hand in hand with support. Over time, our relationship began to heal, not because I opened my wallet, but because she opened her heart. As for my ex and her husband, they were forced to step into the role they claimed so proudly. They paid the bills, they handled the appointments, and they carried the weight of parenthood. It wasn't easy for them, and I knew that. But that was never my problem to fix anymore. I didn't just walk away from being taken for granted. I walked toward a life where my role as a father was respected, not assumed. Emma eventually learned that a father isn't defined by a title, but by the sacrifices made, the lessons taught, and the unseen effort put in day after day. And while the pain of that night at parent-teacher conference will never fully leave me, I can at least say this: it forced the truth into the open. Sometimes it takes losing something to make others see what they had all along. And in my case, it took my absence to finally teach everyone what my presence truly meant. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.